Hello, I'm Realtor Norsati with Keller Williams. With us today is insurance broker Margot Hammond. Hello, Margot.
Hello, Noor.
Thank you for gifting us with your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I appreciate it.
We're going to speak about insurance for people who want to know more about insurance.
Excellent.
But first, please tell us a little bit about you.
All right, so I'm an insurance broker here at Carlton Bundy Mutual Insurance in Rothesay, New Brunswick, and I insure homes, auto, commercial, toys, all over the province. And I've worked in the insurance industry for around 15 years now, and I've been here at the brokerage now for 3 years. And I live and work in Rothesay. I live about 2 minutes from here. So not only is it where I work, it's where I play.
That's great. Rothesay is a beautiful neighborhood.
We're very happy,
yes.
Definitely.
So can you please tell us why insurance is so important? We're talking about residential insurance.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting you asked that because I find in the last few years that's a question that crops up more and more. It's technically, if you pay cash for a home, you do not require proof of insurance when you take possession and get your keys for that home. It wasn't something we really had to deal with in the past, but in the last few years, a lot of people are choosing to move to New Brunswick, selling their homes in provinces where they're getting quite a high price. For example, you can sell a property in Toronto. I had a client who sold a small farm outside of Toronto for $2.5 million, came here, bought a larger farmhouse, a larger property with larger outbuildings, and paid $300,000. So they retired when they moved. So for them and people like them, a lot of times people just think, well, I'm fine. I've paid for the home, don't need insurance, which is great. But insurance is there to help you if you have a big loss in your home, outside your home. But the one thing I find homeowners in particular forget about is your personal liability. So if someone gets injured on your property, whether they're invited or not, if they're injured on your property, they can legally sue you for their injuries. And it's your homeowner's liability that will respond and cover that if you're found liable for their injuries. And that's a big thing, particularly, for example, with that property I mentioned with the great big farmland. They have 120 acres, snowmobile trails. Without liability insurance, if someone got injured on their property, that would come out of their pocket, with or without insurance. And people don't like to think about what could happen, but with insurance, that's my job. I think about all the potential things that could happen and make sure you're taken care of if something does happen.
So is insurance expensive? Is this why they choose not to have insurance, for example, liability insurance?
Some people, I think, believe it to be expensive, but on a whole, I'll be honest, most people just feel, for the clients that I'm aware of that have canceled insurance on a home because they no longer have a mortgage, they just feel it's not important. It's not even so much the expense, they just don't think they need it. You know, one customer once, or one client, I, discussed with them, they owned several acres, so it wasn't just a little tiny postage stamp, and it was in the Kingston Peninsula, again, where a lot of people ATV and snowmobile. And I said, and their theory was if the house burned down, they could just live in their garage and they'd be fine. But if someone's injured on their property and they get a settlement of $500,000, there'll be no garage to live in, because if you have no insurance, they will take the property as payment. So that house and garage are gone, even though nothing's happened to them, and those people have nothing. So it's an interesting thing, because people just think it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
I'll be fine. I don't know anyone that's ever had an insurance claim. It's never going to happen to me.
Yeah, that's what you think. But insurance, I guess, is something that you hope you never use, but that it's there in case.
That's what I tell my clients. Sometimes people will say, I pay a lot, but I've never ever called you or used it. And I tell people that's the best situation you can want, because I've had friends, family, as well as clients have a total loss of a home. They were fully insured. Still doesn't mean they're having a pleasant experience. Their house is burnt down, and just, it can happen to anyone. Even though we think, not us, you just don't know.
Yeah. So let's talk about some considerations that you take into account for insurance, climate being one of them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you had mentioned about price. So there are certain things that can impact the price of insurance. Climate definitely is a big issue, particularly in New Brunswick. Because of climate change, interestingly enough, the last couple of winters have been more rain than snow. So a lot of people moving here think they've hit the jackpot. They're very excited. having lived here my whole life, can assure you there was far more snow than rain many years ago. And it's nice to have a milder winter, but it also means a lot more water, a lot more rain in winter, a lot more ice. So when you get rain in the winter, things freeze and you get damming on your roof and you get ice damming. If we get a real snowy cold winter, it doesn't happen as often, because that leaking in the roof only occurs if you get a buildup of ice and a buildup of snow and freezing and melting and freezing and melting. The other issue with climate here is we live on the Bay of Fundy in a river valley. There are a lot of companies that don't offer flood insurance because of where we are. There's companies that will offer it, but price, that's when it becomes a concern. You know, it can be very costly to have those types of coverages in an area that's impacted by climate change, such as the river valley where we live.
Yes. And are there any particular areas that companies won't insure because they have flooding?
Absolutely. There are some areas, you're right, that different companies, I mean, the importance is, I'll state, as a broker, the importance of calling a broker is, I have home insurance companies I work with. I probably have 7 or 8 different companies that I can look at for home insurance. So if I know one's not going to offer water in an area and it's important to you, I'm going to check my other companies. Oftentimes, people make the mistake of just making one phone call to an insurance company and then just taking whatever's offered. When you're calling those toll-free numbers in insurance companies, it's one company, one product. Mm-hmm. They're not looking at 6 or 7 companies. So you can be missing out on coverages, better pricing, other things such as those. But yes, it can be a challenge in some areas. If it's a flood zone in New Brunswick, the chances of being able to purchase water coverages are very slim. And if you can purchase them, it will be very pricey. Okay. It can, and when I say pricey, it can double your policy. You know, you could have a $1,200 home policy, but you want flooding, and that's a high risk area. The policy could go to $3,000 just to include floods. Okay. Yeah.
So that's something to consider when.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned something about insurance brokers, which I'd like to ask the difference. And you mentioned one difference of insurance brokers versus companies.
Absolutely.
So you have access to a whole suite of lenders. What other advantages?
So I've had both jobs. I have worked with a direct insurance company. So when I worked for a direct insurance company, you would call me, I would provide you a quote. It's one set of rules, one set of price. Here's what we offer. That's what you get. As my role with that company, I worked for the insurance company. That's who I represented. That's who I worked for. And in a way, that's whose interests I was most concerned with, because that's the role as an agent. As a broker, I'm independent. Although I do work at this office for Carleton Fundy Mutual, I write for several different companies. So instead of representing a company as a broker, I represent you as a client. What's most concerning for me is getting you your best coverages and your best price that I can find, is meeting your needs and not taking your needs and fitting them into a company's profile. So when you have a broker, you have access to more policies, different rates, but you also have someone you can call when you need help, who answers the phone, who's dedicated to servicing just you. You're not calling a call center. You're not dealing with 10 people to solve an issue or get a single answer. So personally, I've always, although I did work for a direct company for a long time, I've always had an insurance broker, and I've never insured with a direct company. I like to be able to call someone to talk to them. I like that they know where I live, how many cars I have, they know about my life, that when I ring them up, they know what I need. And I've had a relationship actually with my insurance broker for 35 years.
That's nice. That's a satisfied client. Right?
Well, and what's interesting is when I took this job as a broker and left direct market, he reached out and said, "Are you going to change brokers now?" And I said, "No." Because just like everyone else, when I have a problem, I want someone I can depend on to call who's going to help me. And I know my business well, but I'm pretty sure after my house is burnt down, I'm going to need someone to help me, and I'm not going to ever want to manage that myself.
So are there any instances or any type of people in certain situations where they would need a company more than a broker? Like,
Truth? I don't think so. You know, insurance companies, the one challenge as a broker I have with some insurance companies is for the company, their complete bottom line is 100% profit. That's their 100% interest, which is great. However, it doesn't put the customer first. The reason I left the direct insurance company I had worked for is it had morphed from an insurance company, in my opinion, into a call center. And the ability to provide the level of service that I think we all need when we're purchasing insurance. You need someone who understands the product, understands what your family needs, and can explain and guide you through the buying process. And when that was removed, I chose to leave, because I think that is what insurance is all about. It's about educating our clients. It's about assisting them to make the right decisions for themselves. And you're not going to get that without an insurance broker. Not these days. Yeah. Many years ago, yes, but these days with the automated call center systems, it's just not the same.
So a few questions back, we were talking about climate, and that's a consideration for insurance. Another consideration might be location. Can you talk about that?
Oh, that's a big one. And it's an important one here, more so in New Brunswick and in the East Coast or areas that are outside of large urban cities. Because once you step outside those urban cities, what's a concern for most insurance companies is in an emergency or in the event of a total loss, how quickly can you be assisted? And the biggest cause of total losses of home, the number one, is fire. When you live somewhere rural, depending on how far out you are from things, once you move away from fire hydrants, it changes the price of your insurance. So where I live, I've got a hydrant, got a fire station close by, so I get a fully protected rate. Once I move out of fire hydrant range, as there's tons of areas here, the Kingston Peninsula for one, anywhere you move there, no hydrants. However, if you're still within 14 kilometers of a fire station, you're considered semi-protected. If you've moved somewhere where you're more than 14 kilometers from a fire station, clearly there's no hydrants in those areas, you're in an unprotected area. That impact on your policy price is one of the biggest ones, because you can choose not to have that expensive flood insurance, but you can't change the price for an unprotected home. So I did a quote once, and the person thought they were closer to hydrants. They were not. They thought they were closer to the fire hall. They were not. The difference between the semi-protected and the unprotected on that particular policy was $1,500 a year. Not a very big home either. So whether you're somewhere really rural or just on the outskirts, that exact same home on the city with a fire hydrant on the block could be half the price of the one that you bought in the country, even though it's the exact same house. So fire protection really is the biggest of where you are and the most impactful. Absolutely, 100%.
Old homes. Let's talk about old homes. Not heritage homes, because those are separate, right? Those are not insured.
And I'll say what that is too.
Okay.
There's two types of old homes, all sorts of homes, newer, older. But when we talk about a heritage home, it's a term people use loosely. Some mean older home. When we use it in an insurance term, we usually mean one that's a registered property. So there are some properties, given their historical value, are registered with a national historical registry. If you own one of those homes, a lot of times you're not allowed to remove wooden windows and replace them with metal. You have to keep those same building elements. So we're going to leave those aside. Should you buy a heritage home, make sure you have a lot of money, because it's going to be expensive to insure, period. And I personally have never quoted one that's on a registry. I've always just declined, because I'm well aware that it's going to ask me for a lot more information, a lot more details, and it's going to be a price that I won't want to offer someone. So as a broker, that's why I choose to do some things and not some things, because I just don't want to hand someone a policy quote for $10,000 for a house. Older homes, though, that aren't on a registry, also very important when you're purchasing particularly, is to find out when things were last updated. Is depending on when things are updated. If I have a home that was built before 1950 and it's not had any major updates, no replacing of wiring or a major replacing of plumbing, I'm only going to be able to offer a very basic policy for that type of home because maybe it has some cast iron in there. We don't know. It's the original plumbing. It's never been touched. Hard to say. If the wiring's never been fully redone, is there still knob and tube, or could there possibly be aluminum in it? Because it's questionable, it will get a different price. So knowing when updates were done is important. As most carriers that I work with, if a home can confirm that everything within the last 20 years, roof, wiring, plumbing, and heating have been updated, you'll be able to get a full protection and not a basic policy.
Okay.
So with older homes, the key is knowing, have there been updates, what's been updated, and when was it updated?
And what is an older home?
So an older home really is going to be anything that predates at this point around 1950. 75 years is usually what most consider an older home is over 75 years old.
So there are homes between 1999 and 2007 that have Kitec plumbing. What can you tell us about Kitec plumbing? Actually,
this one is a tricky one. I'll be honest. There are a couple of homes here in Rothsay.
Yes.
Several of them that I'm aware of. And the challenge is this, they're not insurable. I have absolutely no companies that will allow me to write a home with Kitec plumbing. I did get one once, but the only reason I was able to do it is I didn't insure it as a home. They had purchased it with the intent to renovate and then either rent it out or sell it. So it wasn't going to be their primary home. But because it was going to be under renovation and no one was going to live in it, no one was using the water, and they were going to replace the plumbing, that company allowed for me to insure it, but the plumbing had to be done first and out within 30 days. And that's rare, and that's only because nobody moved in. And the home policy was for a building under renovation. Okay. That's not the same as a policy of a home you're moving into.
But like some houses now have been listed and they have Kitec plumbing. So whose responsibility is that? Like the buyers to change it, or the...
It's going to be the seller. It's going to be on the seller's end of things, to be honest with you. And this is my opinion as a consumer. And there's no sort of official on it. But with Kitec plumbing, if a home is uninsurable, it's unsellable. It's on the seller. If you want to sell it, then you definitely want to replace it. And it's a misnomer. Replacing plumbing isn't always an astronomical expense. If it's a simple little garden home where your bathroom and kitchen are back to back, that's just one piece of plumbing. Bigger homes that have multiple bathrooms in different areas can be more costly, but plumbing isn't quite as expensive in some homes as people see it as. But it really would be on the seller, because nobody can purchase it and insure it. So if they want to sell it, they're going to want to update the plumbing in the home, without a doubt.
Maybe we should sort of talk about what Kitec plumbing is.
Okay, so Kitec plumbing...
It's like plastic.
It is. Not to be confused, though, with modern PEX, P-E-X plumbing. Yes. The issue with the Kitec plumbing is very similar to PEX plumbing as far as the material, but what it is in Kitec, it's the joints. So in the Kitec plumbing, each joint, so when you get to a joint in plumbing is just, when the pipe turns, so to speak. So although it's plastic piping, the joints in Kitec have brass in them. They will simply just disintegrate over time. If you have Kitec plumbing in the home you live in now, and you're watching this, call a plumber. Because it definitely is.
What's the lifespan? Like 10 years or something?
The lifespan can be long. The issue is this. Much like old cast plumbing, let's say you have Kitec in your home and you're going to do some renovations, you're knocking out a wall, doing this and that, not touching the plumbing, but disturbing the walls alone, vibrations can cause it to crack and leak. So with Kitec, it's just a matter of time as to when it will let go. And it also matters how the home is used. So if you have a home, one that was for sale recently, a woman purchased it when it was built, lived in it for 30 plus years, and never had an issue. However, lived there alone and was already over 60 when she purchased it and passed well into her 90s. What was one single person? The actual strain on the system would have been pretty low, and she never renovated or touched a thing and left the garden home as it was the day she bought it brand new in 1995. In a house where you have a family of 4 or 5 and you have people coming and going all the time, the more use, the quicker it will degrade. So it's hard to give sort of a length of time, because in some instances, 5 years and it'll blow out your walls, and in other instances it could be there for 30 years. But it is a ticking time bomb. It is going to eventually let go, and it's eventually going to cause a major water loss in that property.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. So there are a lot of power outages happening in New Brunswick. How does that affect insurance?
Well, power outages are kind of an interesting thing. So in my experience, as far as people calling after an outage, the biggest issue, the majority of the time, is food loss. You know, because the freezer went out and it was out for a day or two. They've got a wood stove. They didn't have any other issues, but they'll call because of food loss. On a home policy, most policies have a $1,000 deductible. So unless you have more than $1,000 worth of goods in your freezer, there's just no point calling me. You know, those types of losses aren't really, in my opinion, worth making a claim for. There's not a huge instance of massive claims due to power outages. Yes, pipes could freeze in winter, so it could be an issue. So I do encourage clients who are somewhere rural, if you're in an area where you know it's prone to power outages and the power can be out for several days, it might be a good idea to have a backup generator, definitely a backup heat source. In our home, we have a wood stove. We rarely use it, but if the power goes out, we've got that. We use it on the rare time the power goes out. It's not as catastrophic as it sounds, because in order for your home temperature to drop to the point that your pipes will freeze, you're going to notice because you're home. It's a bigger risk if you're out of the country or away from your home and aren't there or aren't having it monitored. But it's not as bad as people perceive it to be, because from an insurance perspective, it takes a long time before it's cold enough for your pipes to freeze, and you're going to freeze before they freeze. But in more rural areas, it's a good idea to have a backup heat source or a gas-powered generator if you're somewhere where you know it might take up to a week to get back on the grid.
So all these issues that we talked about, if you're renting and they happen, things get damaged, and you don't have renter's insurance, does the owner still, it's the owner's responsibility, correct?
Well, that's an interesting one. It kind of depends, because we had talked about liability for a homeowner. You know, someone's injured or something happens on their property. Renter's insurance also has liability as well. And it works similarly to a homeowner. So if I'm renting an apartment, let's just say, and getting ready with my friends, we're going to go out that evening, we're going to go down to the Cask and Kettle for some drinks and some dinner, and we get all our stuff all together, go out for a girls' night, come back home to my apartment, and there's been a huge fire in the building. If that candle that we had burning while we were getting ready because it smelled so good is the reason that the fire started in the building, I'm not going to get charged with arson. Oh, I didn't do it on purpose. But what I tell people is, when you think, am I liable? You should think, am I responsible? And in that instance where that candle was in my apartment and that damage was done to the building because I left that candle burning unattended and left the home, I'm responsible. So if there's $150,000 worth of damage done to that building because of that, I have to pay it. If I don't have renter's insurance, I still have to pay it. It might take me a while because I'm renting and I'm not homeowning, so I'm probably, but that's the kicker for most renters that they don't realize. Yes, renter's insurance covers your stuff in that fire. You get it replaced. But just like homeowner's liability, renter's liability to me is the biggest piece. Is who can pay that out of pocket? Right. Not many tenants. In fact, probably none. So, I mean, the liability portion. And also, beauty with tenants insurance too is when you're a brand new home buyer and you have no insurance history whatsoever, it's kind of like getting your first car insurance. No history of driving, you're going to get a certain price. If you've had 10 years of tenants insurance and you've never had a claim, you're going to get a whole different price for that insurance because you've got 10 years of insurance history. It shows you're responsible, that you understand, what the gravity of having insurance is, and you get some lovely claim-free discounts, and you also get access to better pricing, as there are some companies, if you've never had any type of insurance and you buy a house tomorrow, I can't even offer you their price. They will not offer a policy if someone's never had any type of home or renter's insurance. So there's a lot of benefits. A lot of benefits to renter's insurance, not just, getting all my stuff back because we went out that night and it's all gone. The other pieces are even more important.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for all this great information.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching.
And thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you so much, Noor, for having me. It's always a delight chatting with you.
Yeah, it's lovely to chat with you too.
Perfect.